Hello, my name is John Witvliet, Director of the Worship Institute at Calvin. I also teach classes in the religion department, and I'm grateful for many partnerships with colleagues in the music department. Today I'd like to say a bit about the cultural value related to emotional expression. Some of us live in cultures with great emotional restraint. Others of us are formed in cultures of great emotional exuberance. What a range all over the world. In some cultures, if you raise an eyebrow, it can be a dramatic show of exuberance. In other cultures, emotion is embodied with much larger gestures. In some cultures, employees at McDonald's are taught to smile. In other cultures, that is frowned upon. It seems disingenuous, strange. What a difference this can make inside of events, including events that happen right at Calvin. Think about athletics. After a home run, a touchdown, a successful high jump or a dive or a race or a tennis match, some athletes are inclined to express their joy with great exuberance in a show of emotion. Others are much more stoic, quiet, constrained, chill. Oh my goodness, is this true in worship? Some of us are formed to be very expressive in both exuberance and in conveying grief. Others of us come from cultures that show very little emotion. The range and intensity of the emotion that is expressed seems just far more constrained or restrained. Funerals vary so widely, for example. In some cultures, tears, cries are expected. In other cultures, there is a much higher value on deep internalization of that grief rather than its expression. This is also true in the classroom. If something of great tragic consequence is shared, perhaps a great injustice, how frustrating it can be to hope for much greater demonstrations of anger and sadness in response to that injustice. Or perhaps something of great beauty is shown, and the response to that thing of great beauty will be so external that from another cultural perspective, some can wonder, has it been deeply internalized? Has the inner beauty been contemplated at a deep level? The possibilities for misunderstanding are great, and yet the possibilities for cross-cultural understanding and new levels of awareness and appreciation are also great. I can learn to not only understand, but to value and cherish someone who expresses emotion in far different ways than I was formed to. And one of the things I've learned is that the longer I spend time coming to know and love people who have been formed in a different way, I find myself growing, stretched, learning to express myself in ways that are still uncomfortable, but less uncomfortable than they would have been. And I find myself open to new kinds of experiences, new levels of empathy and perspective taking, even though I need to also be candid to realize how much farther I have to go. Creating space for each other, but not just space for each other, a deep appreciation and love for each other from one culture to another, so important and valuable. May our continued journey of learning together be a journey of growth and discovery, and may we find this Unlearn Week to be a time that challenges us all to learn to love and embrace difference as an opportunity for growth in the body of Christ and for each of us as individuals.
I'm Joanna Wigboldy. I'm with the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship, and the cultural value I am exploring today is power distance. On one end of the spectrum is high power distance. On the other end of the spectrum is low power distance. Someone who values high power distance is likely to call their professor by a title like doctor or professor, and to use their last name or to use the title pastor when talking to their pastor. Someone who values low power distance might call a pastor or professor by their first name. And within that spectrum, you might have people who use a title but a first name, like Pastor Joanna, or just a last name, like McGonagall or Snape. Someone who values high power distance might take everything their professor says as truth. They might see the professor as the expert who has all the answers, or who is not to be approached. They might feel that their contributions aren't worth bringing up in class because they're just a student. Someone who values low power distance might feel quite free to challenge the pastor or the professor. They might see the professor more as someone who facilitates the conversation and as a co-learner, rather than someone who pours knowledge into their brain. They might feel their contributions are just as valid as a student and bring value to the class. Learning about this spectrum has helped me show hospitality by responding to someone according to their power distance value. This looks like appropriately honoring someone in a high power distance situation by using their title or by following appropriate protocols. Or it might look like emphasizing commonalities and trying to gather the opinions of the group in a low power distance situation. When I think of our mission at Calvin, an understanding of this value could help us better relate to God and to one another. The Bible portrays God with both a high power distance and a low power distance towards human beings. The theological framework for this is transcendence and immanence. Transcendence being our understanding of God as so high above us, all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect, and immanence being our understanding of God being close to us, intimately involved in caring about the intricacies of our individual lives. And we need to see God both ways. The ways we relate to others shapes the way that we relate to God and vice versa. And the high power distance spectrum, recognizing the authority of God, helps us honor the dignity of our brothers and sisters. In the same way, being able to recognize that inherent authority in one another and to treat each other as that authority deserves helps us recognize the authority of God in our individual lives and in our institutions. Understanding God from a low power distance perspective actually has the same result. We recognize that God intimately cares about each person, and so we also recognize the inherent value in each person, and we see each person as someone we can learn from regardless of their title. In the future, I would like to further explore the relationship between power distance and accountability. I can think of some high power distance situations in which accountability is necessary to check the power. I'm thinking about questions like, what is the role of power distance in white supremacy? Could practices of low power distance chip away at this white supremacist idea that whiteness needs to hold the power? How does a reluctance to question authority figures in the church allow abuse to be overlooked or even explained away? Learning about the cultural value of power distance can help us recognize appropriate authority without overestimating it.
Hi, my name is Satrina Reid, and I'm a program manager with the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. As we look at cultural values, one that is worth exploring is being versus doing. Being versus doing is the extent to which an individual or a cultural group prefers quality of life versus proactively working toward goals. So let's look at doing. Someone who is doing-oriented emphasizes being busy and meeting goals. It's all about getting things done. Those who are doing-oriented may value having a process and resources for achieving more goals and accomplishments. Now let's look at being. Someone who is being-oriented emphasizes quality of life. This person may focus on living and enjoying being present and fully present in the moment. So they would likely choose building relationships over accomplishing tasks. This person values the person or people over performance. Being versus doing can have a different time focus. I'm from the United States, and research has shown that the United States is highly oriented towards doing. So, a student brought up in the United States may feel pressure to choose a major upon entering their first year of college. This may create some anxiety for a doing person because it is likely tied to some future achievements, such as if I choose my major now, that having a major will lead to a degree, which will lead to a job, which would allow me to purchase a nice home, which would lead me to possibly being able to get an advanced degree, more promotions, and then ultimately a nice retirement. Now, this is just an example, and it may not look the same for those who are not from the United States or some who are within the United States. So now let's look at a student who is oriented towards being. They may not feel the same time pressure at all to choose a major. They may look at the educational experience as one of discovery. So for them, it may be okay not to have the major. They may say, I'll explore, enjoy my classes, and discover what I want to do or who I want to be along the way. Then once that major is chosen, then I'll choose something that is satisfying to me as a person and will bring me enjoyment and fulfillment in life. And this may look a little different in churches as well, being versus doing. So in a church that is more oriented towards being, it may be perfectly fine for a church service to start at 10 a.m. and not have a specified ending time. So they may want to do that in order to allow for people to have impromptu testimonies or prayer requests, because the focus is on people and the people's quality of life and building relationships. Whereas a church from that's more doing oriented, they may be completely uncomfortable without having time parameters. So the service may start at 10 and have a very known end time of 11 o'clock. And they may plan to have the greetings and the testimonies as well, but it's within that planned hour of service. And this will allow them to accomplish more after service, even if that achievement or accomplishment is cooking dinner or taking a nap. Now, it's important to understand that cultural values are just that. They're values and not flaws. Without this understanding, one who is oriented towards being may see one oriented versus to doing as a workaholic. And one who is oriented towards doing may see one oriented towards being as lazy. But we shouldn't assume that we know why a person is not like us in some way. Why we shouldn't assume that we know why they're not like us and why they use their time differently. It just could be a different way of valuing things. So whether you're a doing person, a being person, or somewhere in between, we can all learn from each other. And let's remember, as image bearers of Creator God, that in the creation story, God both worked and rested. So it's good to plan, work, and create, doing. But it's also good to take time to live in the moment to enjoy the Creator and His creation, being. So as students and staff of Calvin, let us strive to appreciate both doing and being.
Hello, my name is Chau. I'm a staff member of the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. As a resource developer, I serve as an associate editor of the Reformed Worship Journal and a member of the chapel planning team at Calvin Theological Seminary and other projects. The idea of cultural values is fascinating. In most cases, people don't consciously choose how to respond or react to a situation based on their cultural values. The expectation or reaction is often shaped by a value system that they were either taught or learned by watching, like an osmosis, as we pick up things and shape our identity, so to speak. Take individualism and collectivism as an example. The textbook definition for individualism is an emphasis on individual goals and individual rights. while collectivism refers to an emphasis on group goals and personal relationships. The North American culture is often described as individualistic. To illustrate, it is common for school-age children here to advocate not having to wear school uniforms because they value the freedom of individual choice of clothing and the expression of their own personal tastes. However, students from more collectivistic societies think school uniforms give them a sense of identity and the community they belong to. In an individualistic society, people choose their school major, their careers, or their friend circle based on individual goals, desires, and aspirations. In a collectivistic culture, however, while people make choices based on these similar criteria, they also consider if their choices would be approved by their folks, or bring honors to their families, or accepted by their communities. Even in the worship setting, an individualistic culture often looks for the personal worship experience. What do I get from the songs or sermons? What is my emotional journey as I confess my sins? Or what I should do when I receive a charge at the end of a service? A collectivistic mentality reflects on if what the gathered group do in a worship service brings honor to God through the collective experience. What do we do as a congregation? How is the body of Christ as a group is being nurtured? And what can we as a congregation do to bring salt and light to the world? If we lean towards the individualistic side of the spectrum, we will find it fascinating as we interact with people from a more collectivistic culture because we are made aware of others and the collective joys, pains, and needs of the community. If we are brought up in a collectivistic culture, talking and interacting with people from a more individualistic culture helps us to see one's true emotion and the true self, even our own emotions and true self. We need to keep in mind that although we learn cultural values or preferences mostly through subconscious learning, we can choose to use cultural intelligence knowledge to not limit our actions or expectations to our own personal preferences. We can proactively consider other people's cultural values and preferences and act strategically to be loving, understanding, and inclusive. It is not inherently right or wrong when someone is on the left side or the right side or even in the middle of the individualism and collectivism spectrum. The point is, as we interact with people different from our own cultural values or preferences, we understand where they're coming from and how these values guide others' thinking, reaction, or choices. As we recognize the gift and orientation of others, we minimize biases and can make adjustments to our interpersonal approach.